welcome everybody to our final program of the incredible year of 2021. And our special guest is Mayor Alex Fisch in the final week of his term. Very happy to have him here for a big check-in. So without further ado, I'll hand Alex the mic, and then at a certain point we will or he will take your questions. So Mayor Fisch, please proceed.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for giving me this time. I want to, this being the Democratic Club, I'd like to make sure that there's time for questions. But and I've had the month from the nightmare month with my dad having surgery last month and just helping out my parents a lot. So I didn't have a lot of time to prepare, but I did look at what's happened over the last year. I took a moment to look through and see what have we done, because it doesn't, on the one hand, it doesn't feel like much. On the other, it seems like we've been on a tear. And so I kind of looked through, and I'm just going to go through the city's accomplishments during my year as mayor, which has been wonderful. And I appreciate the club's support more than I can describe. Tremendous group of people doing great things for the city, and I really appreciate it. So the year in review. In the last year, and I couldn't believe some of this that has happened, but we passed Culver City's first inclusionary zoning ordinance. All this time, all these, there hasn't been a whole lot of housing development over the last 20 years or so, but the ones that came, notably Ivy Station, were real missed opportunities to leverage the profits of a for-profit development into subsidized below market housing that's accessible to people making 50% of the area median income or 70% of the area median income. So I'm very proud of that finally happening during my watch. We we approved and are launching a mobile crisis intervention program, which it's my hope that we are going to see this take over some of the work that's currently occupying police officers and reduce the need for some of basically our largest budget item. These are when we have police officers doing social work, we're paying $150,000 a year for people to retire at age 55 with a full pension, and nothing wrong with retiring at 55 with a full pension. Go workers. But we can definitely better use the public's money than having police respond to every single mental health crisis, every single non-violent or specialized crisis event. We reduced the enforcement of minor traffic infractions. And I know that we're not perfect on this yet, but it's a big cultural shift. And I actually got word, Mayor Jim Butts of Inglewood, who was also the Santa Monica police chief for a number of years. I was in a meeting with various mayors from Supervisorial District 2, hosted by Holly Mitchell, and I mentioned that this was one of our big achievements, that we were going to try and reduce profiling by eliminating many of the interactions between police and drivers for things that are not significant and not health and safety things, don't pose a threat to anybody. And he raised his hand on the Zoom chat, and I thought, oh boy, old Chief Butts is going to lay into me. And he actually said, thank you. That's the first time I've heard someone from Culver City acknowledge your profiling problem. That's a police chief, because he got pulled over in Culver City regularly and had to say, hey, I'm the police chief. So that's not a small cultural change that we're accomplishing. We got out a letter supporting the closure of the Playa del Rey natural gas storage facility. We passed an ordinance phasing out the use of single-use plastics, which is pretty much cutting edge. And when you've got the environmental advocates saying this is a great ordinance, that you've done something that's out in front. That wasn't popular with every single one of my colleagues, but being out in front on environmental issues is the bare minimum if you're a Democrat, in my mind. We passed an affordable housing linkage fee. Every new commercial development in Culver City is going to have to put aside a chunk of money for subsidized housing. We secured an award of $3.5 million from the state for a subsidized housing project that I hope to have a pretty significant announcement on and a public meeting about within the next month or two. We instituted a traffic management program in Rancho Higuera that's been in the works for a long time to improve pedestrian safety and slow down cars through a place where a lot of people live. We expanded homeless outreach services to evenings and Saturdays through St. Joseph Center. Measure RE went effective, and my back of the envelope calculation suggests we're going to clear a lot of money to expand our city's capacity to deliver services through this measure, and I really appreciate the yes vote from many on this call. We passed hero pay for grocery workers and hospital workers. We are the only city that passed hero pay for hospital workers, the people most affected through all this. And we did it right as the Delta variant surged. People were saying that we were acting inappropriately, that the pandemic was over. And of course, we then went into the next phase. The city's municipal fiber network broke even. I was a skeptic of this, and I admit that I was wrong, but the municipal fiber network that the city invested about $10 million in has begun to be used. It is part of the backbone of why we have Ting, which is a private fiber service to the home, but it is fiber service to the home at a decent price, and it's providing a free Wi-Fi hotspot in the city and gigabit access for affordable housing within the city. It also, this is obviously a more contentious issue, but it's probably a big part of why we are attractive to a lot of employers. Part of not only our location, not only our high skilled workforce, but the fact that people can use this state-of-the-art internet technology for entertainment, which the city has always been the hub for and has provided great middle-class jobs for. People are able to upload movies and edits very quickly thanks to that. We passed a new mobility linkage fee for commercial and residential development. So large projects will pay into the city's coffers to deal with the transition of what was originally a low density city and is inevitably headed towards a more density. We're sort of stuck in the density paradox where, if we were Las Vegas, it's actually, even Las Vegas isn't great to drive in, but if you're a small city, where I grew up, and it's fine, you drive around all day and it works. If you're a big city, then you have the densities for transit, and we're stuck in between. This mobility fee will help us break that logjam and provide people with real options to get around. We passed a resolution acknowledging the city's racial history, the problems of the past. We expanded sidewalk dining. We hosted, I believe, the first ever Pride event at City Hall. We created new bus routes and service for schools and free transit for CCUSD students and low-income transit users. We passed an ordinance to require seismic retrofits of soft-story buildings. We increased the insurance requirements for people who operate fossil fuel pipelines in our city. We required patrons and employees of restaurants, fitness centers, other kind of high public contact businesses. We required them to get vaccinated, which is not only going to help us end this pandemic, it's going to provide assurance for people to go out and live their lives, knowing that they're not going to get COVID from someone in the back of a restaurant, for example. We approved a plan to transition the city's transportation fleet to a 100% zero emission vehicle fleet. We hired a new police chief. We hired a new city attorney. We implemented Move Culver City. We started some really difficult but very overdue discussions about housing in our city and our region. And we enacted an ordinance to prohibit oil drilling within Culver City limits within 5 years. So, there's a recall out there, and I don't think it's a recall because I'm incompetent. I think it's a recall because I'm competent, very competent. We've gotten a lot done. It's really not been me. It's been the city, the long, unheard, suppressed majority of this city that wants to solve real problems. And so I thank you all for that. What's coming next what I see in the near future is, we've got more housing discussions on Friday and Monday. We'll be approving the community center at the extension of the Venda with a small but meaningful housing component, which will house. I don't know if this is totally public, but I think I haven't read the staff report yet, but it will. I can say for sure that it will serve some of the most vulnerable people in the world. We are going to be talking and hopefully having a ballot measure about approval voting, which I'm happy to discuss in more detail or bring some of the experts on that to the Democratic Club at a time when the Republican Party is trying to basically stymie democracy and take away people's votes, prohibit you from going to the polls. Culver City is going to be looking at ways to better express your views, to show to have elections that better reflect public sentiment. Along that line, I expect that we will have, I know we're going to have a meeting about this, and I expect it will get on the November 2022 ballot, an opportunity to enfranchise 16-year-old and 17-year-old voters to vote in municipal elections. And then the other big one that's coming up is we will be the final tax that we've, stepping back a bit. One of the things I'm proudest of is that we've accomplished all of these progressive objectives, including rent control before that, and other things, while starting to balance the city's budget. When I took the oath and began as a council member, this city, under the stewardship of many people, was looking at a $250 million hole in its projected budget needs. I've been sort of the face of 3 different tax measures. And we are very close to closing that budget gap and even adding a little bit of capacity to start working on the massive list of deferred maintenance, unmet human needs and services that people want and need. And I know in November 2022, well, I'm quite confident, I think everyone will support this, that we'll have a business tax that had been on the agenda right before COVID and just seemed politically like a non-starter as we were entering the depths of the pandemic. So that's the state of the city. I think we're doing pretty darn well, and we are attracting attention from all over the country for many of the things we're doing. They're not, obviously, the challenge of being a liberal, of being a progressive, of being on the left is that we are, I analogize it to going on vacation. If you want to go, I've probably done it to this group before, but if you want to go on vacation, it's let's say the family gets together. What are we going to do for vacation? Well, there's part of this country, about 30%, that says we don't want to go on vacation at all. And we're united in that. And anybody who votes for vacation, we're going to look at your ballots. We don't want you to vote on vacation. And by the way, we're going to take your rights. And here's some guns. But if you want to go on vacation, you have to get together. You have to say, yeah, we're going on vacation. Are we driving? Are we flying? Are we taking a cruise? Where are we going? Mountains, desert, beach? And that is the challenge of being anywhere left of center. That's the big tent of democratic politics. So not everything that I've done, not everything that we've done has been everybody's favorite thing, but it is attracting attention because we're solving real problems here in Culver City. And we're going to be, for at least the foreseeable future, the near term, on the leading edge, and we're going to get the dividends of being the people solving these problems. So thanks for giving me this space, and thanks for your support, and happy to take some questions.
Great, well, thank you. So go ahead and raise your Zoom hands if you have questions for the mayor.
I see Disa already has a question in the chat.
Oh, yes. Disa, do you want to unmute and go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mayor Fisch, for your leadership and for giving us the state of the city. That was really encouraging to hear a nice long list of positive things that have been done. I'd be interested in hearing what you think we can do at the local level in Culver City next to, in a meaningful way, respond to climate change.
I love that question because it's something I think about a lot, and it worries me that we have yet to see electoral consequences for denying climate change. And climate change denial is more than just denying the science. It's not acting, right? Which is, I think, a bipartisan problem so far. Democrats are obviously a million times better, but there is widespread widespread failure to act, which is absolutely climate denialism. So there's actually some research on this. A gentleman who's a professor at UC Berkeley and was part of one of the IPCC reports, with some other people, did some research on what are the policy levers at the local government have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And for Culver City, absolutely vehicle electrification is up there for everybody, right? We need to adopt, everybody needs to adopt EVs as quickly as possible. And that's underway. It's sort of out of our control. But what's in our control is we need to promote urban infill. That's one of the top 4. So, this can be difficult among Democrats, but it is effective climate action to allow more people to live and work in places that are already developed, as opposed to sending people out to Centennial, California, which is a fantasy which must never be built. We don't need people 120 miles from downtown LA buying $300,000 homes. That's not climate action by any stretch. And closely related is building electrification. We need to ban fossil fuels from buildings. Commercial efficiency is up there. So, the Green Business Certification Program is good climate action. It may not seem like it. I was doubtful too, but it makes a difference. And I'm forgetting the 4th, but it's another, VMT reduction. So vehicle miles traveled. We need people to be able to meet their needs without driving as much. We need at least a 20% reduction over the next 10 years of how much we in the aggregate drive, which is closely related to the infill problem. And one of the things that I'm passionate about that ticks a lot of those boxes is passive house, which I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's the idea of new buildings that, especially residential buildings that are zero GHG. They don't use much electricity to heat or cool. They're designed from the DNA to the skin to use as little power and water as possible. And Europe is way ahead of us, but that's just a great opportunity to learn and leap forward.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Danny Young.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks. Hey, Mayor Fisch, thanks for giving us the state of the city. This is great to hear from you. As you mentioned, we have a lot of business in the city lately, and huge companies now. I mean, largest in the world now, right, are making their homes in our relatively small city. So something that I worry about with having that sort of behemoth-sized entity in the city is what sort of influence can they have on our local government? I feel like it would be very easy for one of these large companies to try to buy seats on the council or to influence in other direct and indirect ways. So I'm curious if you could speak to anything that you've seen along that issue, or if you have had any experience with it one way or the other. I'm really curious to know how that's impacting us and how we can make sure that we maintain control of our own city.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer, is always people power, right? Always. Obviously, these entities have government relations people, professionals who interact with local government. And my experience, this is not.
Yes. I'm supposed to be on this.
My experience with those folks has been so far that they are straight shooters. But that's just my experience. That doesn't mean systemically that there's not an issue that we need to be, sorry, my dog's going crazy, that we need to be on the watch for. And so I think it's really important that we, one of the things I did early on was push successfully to get campaign finances disclosed online. And that's been great because it hasn't made a difference. People haven't really paid attention because there's some pretty astonishing things in the last set of disclosures that didn't affect the election. People just didn't care where people are getting their contributions from. But that's a good thing to watch. I mean, I think that the status quo is pretty well funded, and the way that they fund candidates is pretty well established. And so, AGLA, these realtors. These are, I don't consider them enemies. They're just vested interest groups that make a lot of money from the status quo and don't want any change. You know, the tech companies, the entertainment companies are sort of a new thing. Sony's been here for a long time. I don't think they've ever been a force in our local politics, but you know, now we've got new big companies. So I don't have a great answer other than that, you know, for us, our campaigns have always been about a fifth of the cost of the more traditional Chamber of Commerce oriented campaigns. And we win elections that way because it's about connecting with people. It's about organizing. And we've been effective at that. So we can't stop what's worked.
Thanks, Ronnie or Tom.
It's Ronnie this time. Hi, Alex, and thanks for being here. You mentioned that the being able to have buildings, to be able to mandate buildings that are fossil fuel free, as far as, you know, not being able to build things that need fossil fuel, correct?
Yes, that's something that's pretty far along in many parts of the world.
I know, but I had the strangest experience on Thanksgiving. We had dinner with family in the Anaheim Hills area, and on Thanksgiving Day, we got there around 1:30 in the afternoon with my electric skillet so I could make some latkes on the run, only to discover that the electricity had been out since noon because of the winds. They had turned, that the power company had turned off all the electricity. And so for Thanksgiving, I don't know how many hundreds of families were without electricity. Fortunately, they had gas cooking, which we were able to use, a lighter to ignite it for the stove, just like the Pilgrims did. And but we were able to do all of that because there was gas stoves, and which, by the way, are so much easier to cook with. But that's the kind of thing, relying on one kind of, we have solar panels here, but we don't have the batteries because the batteries aren't as affordable as they could be to be able to store them. And but until that happens, how can we deal with just having one source of power going to houses?
Well, I think the first thing is that no one has talked about retrofitting yet. At some point, if we're actually going to prevent climate calamity, there will have to be a discussion about retrofit. But by that time, maybe we will have distributed energy generation and storage, more batteries, more neighborhood grids. For now, this would just be new buildings. Our power tends to be much more reliable than on the urban wildlife boundary, which tends to burn down, right? So they get their power cut and they burn down. We have not had as many outages here in Culver City, but it's a great question. I highly recommend induction. We switched to induction, and it's wonderful to cook with. And the recent research on the dangers of burning gas inside is pretty chilling. So I think we made that retrofit voluntarily based on health more than on my climate beliefs, but it's pretty great also. I like induction, but the concise answer is that it would be new construction, and that by the time we really need to think about banning all fossil fuel use, which is going to have to happen in my kids' lifetime, well before and during my lifetime, which is a lot to think about. There are going to be inconveniences associated with that. That seems like a manageable one.
Yeah, I just, again, just worry about times when the power may go off because of an earthquake. I remember during Northridge, I was still, for some reason, when they turned the gas back on, we were able to cook, but I didn't have electricity.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, so I'm saying there's just some sort of a security about having another source.
Yeah, and maybe that's probably battery and microgrids in the midterm, because you also recall both Northridge and Loma Prieta, the worst fires were from natural gas lines.
All right, yeah, understood. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Ron Ostrin.
Can you hear me, Mayor Fisch?
Yep.
Hi, thanks for joining us tonight. It's my understanding that you would like to see R1 housing, R1 zoning switched to R4 zoning.
It's already gone on January
No,
1st.
that's not exactly true. SB 9 is not R4 zoning.
I've
SB
never
9 is
said
a
anything about
particular
R4 zoning and don't know what R4 zoning is. So
Okay. R4 zoning allows you to build a 4-unit building on a lot. And the converting R1 zoning to R4 means that for every house in a single family residence area could build 4 units and possibly 2 more, an ADU and a JADU. And if that's what the council wishes to do, how are you going to enact ordinances to prevent our urban tree canopy from being destroyed by rampant development? And how our 70-year-old infrastructure is not going to be overtaxed, electrical, water, and sewage by the development? And are you still going to require 25% of the R4 development to be affordable as indicated in your directions to the staff?
that was I never supported that to begin with. Also, your materials say that I promote 12 units per 12 homes per R1 lot. So I'm trying to understand, you want to ask your question about your materials, or is this a sincere
I'm not sure
question?
what you mean by materials. If you're referring to SB 10, that's a different story.
I don't know.
Okay.
I've just seen your writing saying that we're going to legalize 12 homes on a lot. So I'm trying to understand where you're coming from here.
I don't recall ever writing that.
Okay.
I recall indicating that the Culver City Council is going to have to decide whether to opt into SB 10 or not.
SB 10
And,
is not an opt-in. It's simply a removal of a CEQA requirement if there is a rezoning, which is sort of irrelevant because we're preparing an EIR, which is what was required under CEQA in connection with the general plan. So SB 10 is relatively moot.
Well, it's not moot, in my opinion, for Culver City, because it could create massive densification and gentrification, and we have an opportunity to opt in or to opt out.
What
We're
part of Culver
changing the
City is at
subject,
risk
Mayor
of
Fish. What I'm asking
gentrification?
about is eliminating R1 zoning to R4 zoning, in which you could build 4 units on an R1 lot and 2 more units as a JADU and an ADU. And how that's going to affect our infrastructure, how are we going to protect the urban tree canopy? That was the question I asked.
Okay, I had enough insurrection on January 6th, and so I intend to comply with state law, SB 9, which allows up to 4 units in any R1 zoned parcel. So that's the answer to that. How do we plan to deal with the infrastructure and urban tree canopy? I can't wait to stop talking about a law that's already been passed and is going to be the law of California on January 1st so that we can address those issues, because I fully believe in the urban canopy. I've never voted to remove a tree in this city. I've overruled the Director of Public Works on at least one occasion, I think 2, with removal of public trees. I've at almost every budget meeting said we need to plant more trees, and that I would go out there myself and dig holes and water trees. So I believe in that stuff, and I wish that we could move on to a more constructive dialogue about the direction of the city and how we can meet our shared goals, like the urban canopy and truly affordable housing.
Well,
Okay.
are you saying that you're not going to
So, Ron,
support
let's-
R1?
So, Alex, if you could answer the second part about the sewage and water and
Yes, thank you. That's
just so that we've completely handled this, and then we can move on to the next.
yeah, I thank you for that redirect. Because I apologize, Mr. Ostrom, but you know, you do get me a little animated. So I apologize for my confrontational state kind of nature there, and I apologize for losing my train of thought. But the household sizes in Culver City are dramatically smaller than when you were a young man, Mr. Ostrom. I'm sure you can appreciate that. And every year, water conservation measures actually decrease reliably by a pretty predictable, I think 1 or 2% per year, our effluent volumes. And so our biggest sewage problem is this stuff is old to begin with, and Charles Herbertson was amazing in bringing, in modernizing the sewage system and also taking it to the next level of retreatment, stormwater capture, all this stuff, really fantastic. And I have every faith in Dimitri to continue that legacy. But also the bigger problem is that we don't have sufficient volume through many of the storm sewers. So we have a system that was built for a city that was supposed to be larger than it is. And so we have capacity, not just based on our current population, but what was anticipated and the conservation savings that we've had. Electricity, that's really not in the city's bailiwick, but we need to actually start to confront that. We need to look at distributed power generation and distribution as a climate solution and as a resiliency solution. So, all this stuff is sort of mid to long term, and it's all, within the city's capacity to handle.
And just to make sure that we've exhausted this, I think there's traffic and parking. If suddenly there's 6 more people living next door to me, are they going to bring in 6 more cars? And are they going to park them in front of my house?
Yeah, parking is the biggest challenge. That's a legitimate thing to talk about too. And I wish we could get over sort of the reaction to changed reality and get to the pragmatic questions of how do we deal with that? Because we are not yet at the point where a lot of people can live car light. There are a lot of people who want that lifestyle and can't really access it because we don't have spaces where that's legal to build. And that's something that we need to work on very deliberately. We need to look at places with great access to transit, the best access to transit, not just formally high transit areas, but places where people can really access a lot of jobs with a walk, because there are a lot of people who want that, both seniors, people with disabilities, and young people. There's a massive movement, a massive unmet demand for car light living. So, that's the big picture, but the little picture of, your street. I mean, it's a public street, right? We have to figure that out. We have to figure out how to use that shared space, which belongs to the city. And it's worth remembering that about 1/3 of the city is already given over to cars. So, how we use that 1/3, the vast majority of public land more effectively to allow people to live and work here, is a challenge that I welcome having that actual discussion once we get past the sort of reaction and resistance to gentle density.
Great. I appreciate you working on this one. Let me go to Pete and then Mark and then Paulette.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the like metro bike and lift bike type of situations that I don't think we have in Culver City yet. And I heard something recently that we're going to get them pretty soon. Do you have an update on when we're going to get some kind of bikes you can rent by the minute?
Yeah, we'll have bird shared bicycles, e-bikes, which is kind of cool. I think that by the end of January.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's that's exciting because those are really useful. If you've ever ridden an e-bike, then if you haven't, then please participate in my e-bike testing program, because you might just
I would like to. I have I took part in the Santa Monica green bike that they had, and related to the last question, when I lived in San Francisco, we had city car share and a few other services where you could rent a car by the hour. And I lived 6 years in San Francisco with no car. And it was great because, that's a different place. You can walk everywhere, or you can bike everywhere. And it never rains. So down here especially. So that's a bad thing in some ways, but there's good things about it never raining too, because it's easier to get around.
It's a bad thing when you're in Anaheim Hills and they've got to turn off the power for an entire city because it's the wind's blowing and SCE is going to burn down the city. But it is amazing. And we would be a 1-car household if we had a good shared car option.
Yeah, I think that's I think people could save a lot of money, and we'd save a lot of space and the traffic better.
The closeout of your question is that we approved a partnership with Metro for a public shared bike facility a couple of years ago, but Metro then reshuffled its whole plan. So we'll be watching out for that, because I think it is important. Ultimately, we're going to have to invest in public mobility options, because the private ones just come and go.
Thanks.
Okay, Mark Lippman.
Hey, good evening. Thank you, Mayor Fisch, for joining us tonight. Also, thank you for mentioning in your report about the business tax that's going up on the next ballot. And if I remember correctly from when we saw this a couple years ago, the tax increase on the major corporations was very, very minimal. It was very soft. And as we know, much of this housing and infrastructure concerns that have been raised repeatedly in the community is directly impacted by these major corporations, and them sponsoring an event here or there to get their name out isn't giving back to the community in the way it really should happen. So I wanted to ask you directly about having a real major corporations tax for the ballot to make them financially accountable to our community. And part two is also on a vacancy tax. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I think that a jobs tax is not really necessary if we get the business tax right. I mean, people who need jobs generally aren't against them, right? So yes, these companies and the economic success of Culver City poses problems that we need to solve, but discouraging people from, discouraging jobs, and the jobs that are going to get cut are not the $200,000 software engineers, they're the janitors. And it's the contracting out to not have jobs, right? If you have a head tax or a jobs tax. So I have never supported like a head tax, but I think that, raising $12 million from business and exempting small business is not minimal. I think it's fairly substantial. So, and then the second part, vacancy tax, yes, but we need to prioritize. And I think that the evidence, and I think the academic literature on a vacancy tax shows it's not useless, and I'm not against it. I support a vacancy tax, but it's also not super impactful. And we've still got, in my mind, there are two revenue measures that would come before that. You generally don't want two revenue measures on a single ballot because it's voters see that and it's too much to really think through. Whereas kind of laying it out, making the case for each one is more persuasive and more successful. So, we already know we have a business tax that's been vetted, that generally has buy-in throughout the community, and that will raise substantial money for our needs. So I think that's next up. And the one after that, I think, would be directly funding some of these housing and homeless services things, whether it's a bond or something else, parcel tax, whatever. That's just that's a future council meeting in the near future. I think on Monday we're going to be starting that discussion. So thank you for the question, Mark.
Great, thank you.
Paulette Benson.
Right here. Thank you. A couple of questions following up on your talk on parking. From what I understand, if there are 4 units, it's probable we're dealing with 8 cars per lot. At 8 cars per lot, our streets can't handle those additional cars. We don't have the space. So what we're going to end up with, especially since people when they build, can now tear down the garages, and they don't have to allow for garage space. Why hasn't the city council considered doing what Redondo Beach has said? Yes, there's a state mandate, but they have mandated that any of new construction has to have on-site parking. And therefore, those cars would be kept off the streets, which would lead to less noise, less pollution as cars go around the block trying to find parking. And it would make one of the major problems of this probability coming up go away. And lastly, what makes you think there's going to be affordable housing? There's no indication and there's no requirement that it be affordable housing. And therefore, I can't imagine any developer or homeowner not charging what they can. And therefore, it won't be affordable.
I don't plan to sell my house for subsidized prices, right? I mean,
why should you? I'm not saying you should, but I'm saying this is going to lead to problems that as an intelligent person. And what are you and the rest of the city council going to do to solve these problems?
So for starters, as a baseline core belief. I have to disclose that I believe the academic literature that says that parking mandates increase greenhouse gas emissions. That's come out over the last couple of years. It's well supported. I didn't see any methodological.
What does that mean in English?
It means that requiring people to build parking when they build a home increases the amount of driving that people do.
But it doesn't increase the number of cars on the road, does it?
I'm
It
sorry, I
doesn't
don't-
increase the number of cars on the street.
So I'm just stating one part. A lot of this is that I have a more complex view of all of these issues than the questions you've asked would suggest. First of all,
You're right, I'm asking simple questions.
so requiring parking both increases the cost of housing. So if you're concerned about affordability, you should not want parking mandates. And it increases the amount that people drive. That's research that's come out over the last couple of years, and I don't have any reason to dispute it. The issue with like, why would we think that these will be affordable is that, we have to recognize that SB9, that gentle density, is one part. It's a single, if anybody thinks that that's the end of all housing policy, I think that they are not familiar with the depth of the housing shortage in this state. We also need to pursue explicitly subsidized housing. I've been working on legislation, helping with sort of the grassroots with Alex Lee's legislation for social housing in California. That's going to be genuinely affordable if it happens. These are all big challenges. SB9 is not the solution to housing homeless people. It houses homeless people indirectly by easing the housing shortage. Because if you look at cities that have many more homes per person, they have much lower homelessness rates. Houston isn't a wildly liberal city. Tampa isn't a wildly liberal city. Their weather's fine. The difference is that rents are cheaper. All of us have squeamishness with the market, but it is 95% of Californians live in housing that was privately financed. That's where most of the new housing in the near future is going to come from. And so every little piece of that helps housing affordability. As for parking, I think part of your concerns can be assuaged by the fact that this sort of redevelopment doesn't happen very quickly. That's bad news for affordability. It's good news for fears of neighborhood change. The Turner Center did an analysis of what SB9 would do under more liberal assumptions than what the bill actually says. And over an indeterminate period of time, like indefinitely, they anticipate that only 400 additional housing units would be built in Culver City under the rules of SB9. So I don't see traffic calamity from that.
Only 800 new cars. Okay.
We live in a city. It's a very difficult, we have a density paradox, like I said, that many people can't use transit, and we need to make the options better for people who want to.
So Donna Kent, Brian Sanders, and then me.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks so much for doing this for us. So my questions are sort of related to a number of things that people have said. Going back to the big giant companies that have moved or are moving in here. You know me, Mayor, I'm one of those progressive pinkos and think that the really, really, really rich people should be paying a lot more money. And so I have a general question of, they're on sort of our land, and what are they doing for us? And specifically, I wanted to know, I'm sorry, one other thing I wanted to address to Paulette, and maybe this is a general question. A lot of, I was recently in Hermosa and Redondo Beach, and a lot of the newer buildings are building parking underneath. Even
It's required, their city council required it.
Okay, so I want to make the suggestion, and we, near where I live, we have a number of, I believe there's 6 units and they all have parking underneath. And that to me actually makes sense. It gets them off the street. And I agree, this question of mobility in general, this is going to be with us for a long, long time, because this city, as part of LA, was built for oil. That's what it was built for. It wasn't built to get people from one place to the next, whether they could afford it or not. So we have a long, long road ahead of us. But the other thing, and this is specific and near to my heart, what are those big companies doing for our schools?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the number one. Whenever these folks come in and they say, where should we be donating money? I think every elected official probably says the Culver City Ed Foundation. And that's certainly been the message. Sony's been a regular contributor. I would be shocked if Apple and Amazon aren't contributing substantial amounts. But one area where I think we all agree, and Mr. Lippman agrees, is that the best charity is voluntary and unnecessary, because we should have a capacious and well-funded public sector delivering services and people's needs. So, I think Measure RE was a direct shot at that, because this is also, it's not just an oil town, this is a real estate town. Harry Culver was a real estate developer. And what Apple's doing right now, they're buying properties, and those big transactions are some of the most just taxes out there by some of the richest people.
Okay.
Great. Brian Sanders, you're on.
Hi, Mayor Fisch. Hi, everybody. Mayor Fisch, thanks for coming. I'm hoping you can comment on the November 2020 email that was written by Professor Elmendorf from UC Davis about our housing element. And he wrote that he had spoken to local officials in Culver City who were, quote, trying to monitor and control their consultants.
This is an email that I was not a party to, is that right?
Yeah, he wrote it to Professor O'Neill at UC Berkeley, recounting a conversation that he said he had with local officials. He didn't name you. I'm just wondering if you can comment if you know anything about that.
I don't know anything directly, but I definitely can address the spirit of it. And I'm glad that you brought it up here, because I'd heard about this question in Planning Commission, and I'm glad that we don't have to do this, from the dais. The sixth RENA cycle, Regional Housing Needs Assessment, this sixth cycle has some serious changes of law. And I anticipated correctly, because we still have a messed up housing element, which is not problematic for the reasons that your organization has promoted, but is problematic for opposite reasons. It's still not there. They have not followed, not just the intent of the law, they haven't followed the letter of the law, as you saw in that email, or the letter from HCD. So I anticipated that consultants would have trouble. And I also anticipated that consultants would have a cultural issue, and that cities usually do RENA as a giant fake paper exercise. The Regional Housing Needs Assessment and housing elements is phony. Right. Having Tito's Tacos as a redevelopment site is fake. And consultants know that most local officials like that, because most local officials don't want the backlash that you and Mr. Ostrin are leading. That's anticipated. And so, I wanted to be proactive. And say,
I'm not sure. Sorry, I guess you're making two references on a recorded call here, just to set the record straight. What organization are you associating me with?
I don't know. I'm wrong. I retract it. You're not leading anything. But the backlash that has happened in Culver City was totally predictable. And that's why local elected officials do fake housing elements. And that's why I knew that our consultant would do a fake housing element without guidance from the city council. And so I think I was pretty darn transparent. We put that the guiding principles out there. We continued it for 2 or 3 meetings. We discussed it ad nauseum. We published it. We edited it and published the red line of the edits. And that was a document meant to guide the housing consultant to say, we are serious. We really want to meet state law. We don't want to be
Right.
a recalcitrant jurisdiction. And the other thing that I want to point out to you is if you look at how these housing element consultants were hired, there were no competitive bids. We didn't get 2 responses to our RFPs.
That's interesting.
One. And the
Why is that?
reason for that is that the PlaceWorks, which handed out the grants that paid for these consultants. So one of the housing element consultants handed out the grants for housing elements consultants under SB2. I think it's SB2. And it's out there that they work together to divide up the cities. So I'm trying to lead this city responsibly, and I'm trying to deal with what I perceive as a cartel to resist housing people. That's what I've been doing this whole time. And so, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if the conversation that was described in that email, you know, wasn't to control, it was to guide. It was to lay out our expectations as a council to not hand in a fake housing.
I mean, obviously I didn't read the entire email. It does mention about guidance for how to write a housing element, but the particular phrase that struck me, saying that local officials, that he was recounting, that a conversation that local officials here in Culver City were trying to monitor and control. You know, I understand after the fact, now that we've seen that Tito's Tacos was on the list, I can understand why you would want to monitor and control that. I guess I don't know if Tito's Tacos was on the list in November 2020.
I wasn't a party to that email. I didn't write it, didn't receive it. I'm not Chris Elmendorf, so I guess it's a question for him.
Yeah, no, it's in public records, but I'll make sure you have a copy of it. I appreciate you answering it. And the thing that's interesting about what you're saying is I'm trying to wrap my head around, like, where exactly in the timeline then is Veronica Tam? Is she already hired as of November 2020?
I don't remember. Yeah. I don't remember specifically, but November 2020. I mean, it's not about Veronica Tam. It's about all of them. Look at every single housing element in the state. They're all this way.
Ramey and Associates as well. They're also the consultants to monitor and control. I'm just trying to understand.
Brian, I didn't write the email. I don't know what he got.
I'm just trying to understand.
I don't know who I'm trying to monitor.
I'm actually just trying to I'm not attacking you on this. I'm just actually trying to.
I don't know. I didn't write the email.
I think that this is about gone to I think we.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
But thanks, Brian. Thanks, Alex. Kareem, do you have a question? I was going to wrap up, but I'm happy to let you slide in here.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Mr. Mayor, thank you for being here. We've been through a very terrible pandemic, and out of that disaster, a few things that were somewhat positive came out. And one of them is the fact that Main Street is now blocked to traffic. Do you think we can keep it blocked forever and turn it into a public space that will be somewhat connected, maybe with a scramble or not, to Parcel B? I would love to get your input about that. Thank you.
I feel very confident that we're going to have that closed certain nights and weekends with, I think there's strong support on the council to install bollards so that we'll have that flexibility. I hope that we can, we've had this conversation and my hope is that we can really push back on, because obviously there's been backlash on Move Culver City and there might be backlash on this. I kind of want to feel it out and see what the tolerance is, because I like the idea. I like your phrasing of Main Plaza, right? Instead of the world's shortest Main Street, the world's most main plaza.
Main Street Plaza.
Yeah. So
thank you.
No promises, but I love the idea.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for spending your time with us tonight, and to everybody who brought in their questions. I also want to shout out Thomas Small, who's on this call, because as far as I know, before Thomas, the state of the city was something that the mayor gave at a private event for the city, the Chamber of Commerce. And Thomas put on a beautiful event at the Frost Auditorium a few years ago and reported to the people instead of to the chamber. And unfortunately, COVID has prevented subsequent mayors from repeating that sort of event, but I am really happy that you came to our free public event and, braved a storm of challenging questions from all directions.
I want to apologize for any chippiness. Obviously, we're all, I guess the last bit of state of the city is that we should all recognize that we've been traumatized by the last 20 months, both, the political period before Joe Biden and being isolated and being scared and not being sure with COVID. But so, I'm just as affected as all of you. And I apologize for my shortness. I appreciate everyone's passion for the city and appreciate very much the Democratic Club, all you do, and for giving me this time.